Chapter 127, Yongding Pharmacy. The new year is near, the wanderer returns home, and the pedestrians in the road are overwhelming. When the rooster crows, it is exceptionally quiet. However, under the elm poplar trees next to the official road, which had lost their leaves and only stubble and withered branches, there were a group of people who were pressed by black, all with swords at their waists, dressed in strong suits, and with serious faces. There were many people, but they didn't make a sound. Everyone's eyes were more or less on the man at the front. A thick mist spread over the mountains, enveloping most of the city of Tongzhou on the plain ahead, so that even if the distance was only a few miles, the outline of the city was blurred. Xie Wei was dressed in white as usual. The long figure, sitting high on a jujube red horse, although he did not see any sword, but he took off the three-point Confucian spirit of the court, but there was a kind of sharpness that was rare to see, like a sword hidden in the sheath. The cold mist hit the people's faces, but it was a sense of slaughter. The swords, pianos, swords, and books are all behind him. At the moment, although no one drew their swords, they all faced the Tongzhou city, staring at something closely. The belly of the fish has appeared white in the east. Almost as soon as the first rays of light rose from the ground in the morning, and the moment it broke through the fog, a faint white light rose from the edge of the city into the sky from the bottom up, like a white line, fleeting. Daikon Jianshu was suddenly shocked. A good game has been planned for a long time, and it is the perfect time to close the net. But there was no joy in his heart. Xie Wei also took this faint white flame into his eyes, the end of his deep pupils was dark, but there was no expression on his face, it was a kind of ruthlessness that was as high as a god, and he waved it forward gently, lowered his eyes and said, "Let's go." Asterisk. What does the capital and the court mean to her? The moment she got out of the carriage, Zhang Xuning stared at the inn across the street and thought for a long time. The gently floating mist in the city, with the cold winter wind, hit her face, wetting her simple dress, making her hang her head, and couldn't help but look at herself at the moment. There is no pressed hairpin ring. I'll look without restraints. There is no need to think about secular etiquette, but in this Tongzhou city, which is only dozens of miles away from the capital, no one knows her identity and has seen her appearance, and naturally no one will know that she is the unlucky second girl of the Zhang family, and she is the companion of the eldest princess of Liang in the palace. All baggage was lost in an instant. If people have not experienced it, they will never understand what is most important to them based on the imagination of their childhood. In the last life, Wan Niang told her that women are born to coax men, and they are born to seek glory and wealth, and the most noble and successful woman in the world should sit next to the emperor, holding the phoenix seal, so that other women in the world will look at her eyes and live. She's fed up with the snobbish snobbery of the countryside. Later, when she returned to Zhang Mansion in the capital, she learned her true life experience, and she was even more unhappy and resentful, thinking that the high god owed her, so she insisted on drilling the tip of the horns and climbed to the position of the Lord of the Six Palaces with great difficulty. There is glory, there is wealth. But with these others, they will covet it, and the days will not live in the countryside. Entering and exiting the palace is even more of a dream. If you want to see a lantern festival, Shenju, this elegant and cowardly 95 emperor can't take her to the market to experience the true taste, although it is a surprise for her to prepare a lantern festival in the palace, but it has become her extravagance and frivolity in the mouth of the minister of Zikingliu. That's wrong, that's wrong. If she had pressed her temper in the countryside back then, she would have picked up a stick and beaten at these nonsense old pedants one by one, and she would not let go without beating her head and bleeding. But she is the queen. I regretted it and wanted to throw the phoenix seal away. The ministers who were attached to her were not allowed, and the favorite concubines in the 6 palaces were eyeing her, and she was not allowed to walk on the front foot and the back foot would be in the wilderness. What's more, there was Shenju who didn't agree before, and Yanlin who rebelled against her and put her under house arrest. A palace is actually surrounded by 4 high walls and ambushes on 10 sides. Gradually, I couldn't even sleep well, and I couldn't sleep well for a long night. You can't do it, you really can't do it? Jiang Xuning stomped her feet, and finally thought clearly and resolutely. This palace has money in his hands, and Fan Yin's thighs, leaving the capital is the sea is wide and the sky is high and the birds can fly, where can I not live a good life? I think that I can't help a weak woman on Lord Zhang's side, so it is better to take this opportunity to go first, so as not to be caught by them and return to the capital and be angry. As soon as the thought landed, she took one last look at the inn, and turned around directly, not entering the inn, but taking advantage of the early morning. Tongzhou City had just woken up in the light, there were not many pedestrians in the road, and the footsteps were brisk, and they went in the direction of the city gate. The silver tails she carried were enough for her to go to Shudi. When she entered the city last night, she noticed that there was a shop renting carriages along the way, and the money in her hand was enough to buy a maid, to buy a coachman, and even a strong guard, so it would be safer to go all the way to Shudi. In winter, although there are fewer foreigners coming and going to the city, the shops are doing the same. All of them want to take advantage of the closing season to sell more New Year's goods, and to add a few more bowls of meat to the family on the day of the New Year. So as I walked, there were more and more pedestrians on the road. The carriage shop is just ahead. A banner slanted out of the cold wind, and people were entering and exiting the gate. Not far from the carriage, someone set up a tea shed in the street, and had just boiled water to make tea for those who had stayed there. It's been a cold day this year. How can this be considered cold? I just came back from the capital, and I heard that when the Tatars sent envoys to pay tribute this year, several horses froze to death on the road. Phew, what kind of tribute? People are asking for peace. One thing, haha, one thing. Jiang Xuning originally just passed by the tea shed, and wanted to go to the carriage shop in front, and when she heard the word harmony, her steps were steep, and she turned her head to look at the tea shed. The people sitting in the tea shed were dressed in different clothes, rich and poor, and their faces were all strange. But when she saw it, she felt familiar in a trance. Vaguely returned to the day when Yu Fangyin was married to Shudi, went out of the capital, and past the post station, as if there were similar businessmen sitting in the similar tea shed, and even the words that were said seemed to have similar content. There was a canopy illuminated by the sun, and there were gray clouds at once. The rows of houses and the old and silent city walls suddenly receded far away, crumbling and crumbling into a plain overgrown with withered grass. Yu Fangyin's carriage with red silk was already gone. The Praetorian guards approached in the smoke and dust billowing from the horses' hooves. She remembered that she couldn't suppress that melancholy impulse, and asked Shenzai, "Doesn't your highness want to stay in the palace too?" The woman with a bit of heaviness in her grace was clearly the same age as herself, but she seemed to have blocked the depression in her arms, but she withdrew her distant gaze and looked at her quietly, smiling as if she had seen it, and the clouds were light and light. "Who wants to?" she said. "Who would want to? Who wants to stay in the palace? Let's let one go." On the street, a man came in a hurry with a cart full of goods, and when he saw a man in the middle of the road in front of him, he couldn't help but shout loudly. The things in Jiang Xuning's mind dispersed with a bang. There are no withered grass, no gray clouds, no fields, and no Shenzai, only the noisy voices of people in the market filled with fireworks, and the strange curious eyes of the people around them. She came to her senses and hurriedly retreated. The guy who pushed the cart didn't pay attention to what she looked like, and hurriedly pushed the cart away, only muttering, "Sleepwalking on the road early in the morning, what are you doing?" Jiang Xuning watched this person walk away, and then remembered that he was going to rent a carriage. However, when she took another step, she felt that the soles of her feet were a little heavier. there was a burst of emptiness in my heart, and the fingers holding the small burden slowly tightened, and I couldn't walk anymore as I walked, stopping in front of a shop that had not yet opened, and staring at the carriage shop not far ahead. It's about how long she's been standing. There was a noise in the nearby shop, followed by the sound of the door open. A medicine boy in green clothes opened the door, carrying a square sign with the word Yongding written on it, and was about to hang it outside. When he looked up and saw a girl's house outside, he subconsciously asked, "Are you coming to see a doctor?" Zhang Xuning pretended to be absent-minded in her heart, turned her head and saw the medicine boy holding a signboard in her hand, only to find that she was standing and hindering people from opening the door to do business, so she said no, apologized, and walked forward. However, after only a few steps, I realized that something was wrong. The signboard in the medicine boy's hand flashed through her mind, leaving only the word Yongding on it, which made her stop for a moment, turned around and walked back and asked, "This is Yongding Pharmacy?" The little medicine boy hung up the signboard, and when he saw her go and return, he was a little dazed, and replied, "Yes. You're going to see a doctor again." Zhang Xuning looked at the medicine shop, and there were many people around her, but she didn't look like she was on guard. Her heart sank for a moment, and she asked, "Is there a teenage child who has been here?" The little medicine boy only said that she was here to find someone, and said, "I haven't seen it, but the girl has lost her relatives." Zhang Xuaning's brows jumped fiercely. "Haven't been here?" That little treasure deliberately mentioned Yongding Pharmacy with himself. She thought the other party would come to arraign. Wrong. This thing is really not right. Zhang Xuaning couldn't calm down when she thought of this, so she stepped into the door without saying a word, and said straightly, "Where is your doctor? I have something important to see him." Dr. Zhang of Yongding Pharmacy is praised for his medical skills in this Tongzhou city, and he just got up from this night's sleep, but he looked old and strong, and he just took a pair of acupuncture and moxibustion and walked out of the back hall, and saw that someone wanted to look for him, just as someone had an emergency illness to be treated, and persuaded her, "The old man is, the girl is not in a hurry, tell me who is sick in your family, what symptoms, and the old man is well prepared." Where did Zhang Xuning listen to his nonsense? He interrupted him without waiting for the other party to finish speaking, and said, "Lord Zhang's identity is in danger of being revealed, and he has gone to Tongzhou with the heavenly sect to divide the rudder. Where are the reinforcements from the imperial court?" Dr. Zhang's eyes widened, and he was confused. "What?" Zhang Xuning was suddenly stunned. "You don't know?" Dr. Zhang had never seen such an inexplicable person, but he suspected that someone had hysteria, and he replied with a benevolent heart of hanging a pot to help the world, "Are you looking for the wrong place?" Zhang Xuaning's blood froze inch by inch. She asked, "Doctor, how many Yongding pharmacies are there in Tongzhou City?" Dr. Zhang said, "It's just the old man's family." Zhang Xuaning's mind instantly swept over the faces of Zhangsha, Xiaobao, Fenminjiao, Huang Qian, and others, and his body shook suddenly, almost not standing, and took a step back before barely steady. His face was already pale. Yongding Pharmacy is a fake. It is also false that the imperial court has support. How can it be? What should I do with Zhangsha? Dr. Zhang looked at her. "Girl, you don't look very good." Zhang Xuning asked dreamily, "Doctor, how to go to the Yamen?" Dr. Zhang didn't hear much clearly, and said, "There are no patients in the pharmacy, why don't you sit down and take a breath first?" Zhang Xuning was so anxious at the moment that he could listen to this old man's chatter. His face changed, and he was already a little fierce, so he only asked him loudly, "I asked you how to get there." Chapter 128, Exposed. Tianjiao has been founded for a long time, more than 30 years ago, originally formed by some displaced people in the south of the Yangtze River who had lost their land and property to gather in the mountains and forests, and specifically opposed the government, and it was called Datonghui in the rivers and lakes, and it did not become a climate. Until the head of the sect, his old man's house, passed through this place, and preached in the mountains for more than 10 days with Taoism, the congregation thought that the gods had descended to earth, and they were elected as the leader. After that, when he was an old man, he changed the name of Datonghui to Tianxiao, saying that we were no longer bandits in the green forest, but a new sect that pursued Buddhism and Taoism at the same time. First, to avoid the suspicion of rebellion, and second, to preach in all corners of the world. Many people believe in joining, and the provinces are widely built and ruddered. If the brothers have a case, it is really convenient to take care of it. In Tongzhou City, Huang Qian pointed forward with a smile as he walked. Lord Zhang, in front of it is the Tongzhou rudder, and it was built in the Taoist temple according to the old rules of decades ago. The brothers are waiting in the back mountain. Zhang Xia raised his eyes and saw that it was indeed a Taoist temple. The west of the city of Tongzhou is close to the mountain, which is a natural barrier, although the mountain is not high, but it also has a bit of beauty. It is planted with old pines that have endured in winter. At the foot of the mountain, a gate was built, and the top hung a Shangqing View 3 words, to see that the plaque and the building are a little old. It is a year, and even the outside looks very dilapidated, and there is usually no incense. Since watching Xiaobao drive Zhang Xuning to Yongding Pharmacy to see a doctor, Zhang Xia has been a little absent-minded, and there is a slight solemnity on his pale face. When he saw the gym, he just nodded. The origin of the heavenly sect is spread among the people, but in the eyes of a court official like him who knows its details, there is nothing treacherous and mysterious. Huang Qian's words are roughly good. In the early years, the Tianjiao was a Datong society formed by displaced people who had lost their land, in order to fight against the squires or rob merchants in order to gain a place to survive. But about 15 years after the first emperor ascended the throne, that is, in the 15th year of Dejin, there was a big and small thing in Buddhism and Taoism. Taoism is a native sect that has been prevalent in Middle-earth for a long time. Helplessly, more than 200 years ago, Buddhism was introduced from the West, and it coincided with the troubled times, and there were countless believers in the north and south of the river, and Taoism was faintly not lost. The two temples repaired the temple and started to look at the beginning of the view, and from time to time they competed for the boundary between the religion and the land, and there was friction with each other. By the time the emperor ascended the throne, Buddhism had become popular. At that time, Buddhism was headed by the White Horse Temple. The first emperor even visited the White Horse Temple to pray for blessings and incense, and the presiding abbot was the current national teacher of the present dynasty, and Taoism was respected by the Sanqing Temple, and it was rumored that there was a 1,000-year-old Taoist system, and the main Taoist number was True B, and everyone respected a True B Taoist person, which was also the fine channel method. Unexpectedly, that year, the two religions fought against each other and made a big fuss. Both religions have the intention to fight for status, and the monk of the circular machine and the true Yidaist then made an appointment at the foot of Mount Tai to discuss the Tao, each fighting the true law of Buddhism and Taoism, and competing with each other. For a time, the cultivators and believers gathered, all gathered to listen to the two preaches. Because of the passage of time, only a few words have been left about the grand occasion of that year, but the final result is widely spread. The Taoist side of the true Yidaist was defeated miserably. It is rumored that the circular machine monk was talking with the true Yidao people for a few days, and on the spot exposed many Taoist temples who had abducted and plundered the people's daughters, hiding filth and dirt, like prostitution, and even pointed out that the real Yidao people were demons who came to the world to cause trouble in the world, and they were a demon Tao, and the practice made them visible. Everyone was in an uproar. Sankigwan was smashed clean, and the people of Janai Dao fled and disappeared from the wilderness. The circular machine monk has risen in prestige after this battle, and the incense of the White Horse Temple is becoming more and more prosperous. However, what few people know is that the true Yidao people have not really disappeared. He changed his body, changed his common name for himself, took the meaning of everything is over, called Wanziozi, and saw a good time for the people to make a living, and preached in the Datong society, but he despised the Buddha and abandoned the Tao, created his own heavenly religion, and made a comeback. Its doctrine is based on the principle of universal harmony, mutual assistance at home, and all are brothers, so it is widely praised. The majority of the people in the world are poor, and they are all glad to hear the teachings. Therefore, it didn't take a few years to become the climate, and 20 years ago, the king of Pingnan rebelled with his help, so that he could hit the capital in one fell swoop, and almost overthrew the dragon chair of the great Jian emperor. In the end, what was the truth of the Tao back then, Zhang Sha did not know. It can be deduced from common sense that this Janai Dao person, who is now called Wanziozi and is the head of the heavenly sect, must still hold a grudge against the grievances of the past. The circular machine monk helped Chen Lang ascend to the throne 4 years ago, and the credit also pressed Xie Wei's head, and because of his high respect in Buddhism, he was crowned a national teacher, but I am afraid that this head of 10,000 religions will be regarded as a thorn in the flesh. It is not uncommon for the heavenly sect to be compared to Buddhism, and it is not uncommon for the rudder dove to occupy the magpie's nest and hide it in temples and Taoist temples. I just don't know how many dangers are waiting for people to set foot in. At present, almost all the people of the heavenly sect who are accompanying him have come from Tongzhou to Rudder, and when they go to the Shankingwan, they are all familiar with the road. The fugitives from the prison followed behind, their faces worried. Xiao Dingfei was shaking the gold-sprinkled folding fan in his hand in the winter, but he looked around. Although his facial features were handsome and graceful, he felt a little restless in his expression. He looked at the doorway. There were a few Taoist guards outside, all of them were clever, and when they saw them coming from afar, they passed inside. Xiao Dingfei felt that the soles of his feet were filled with lead. Seeing that he was about to reach the steps of the temple, his eyes rolled around, and he suddenly let out an ouch, raised his hand to cover his left rib, and said that his lungs hurt and he was going to see a doctor. Unexpectedly, Feng Minjiao knew his virtue, although he didn't know why he had to pretend to be this before the rudder, but he kept in mind the instructions given by the sect leader to take care of him, and said without buying it at all, Master Wu Helm is in the view, since Gongzi is so uncomfortable, it is better to go to the old decay first to see Gongzi, and then find a doctor for Gongzi. How about it? Xiao Dingfei's face suddenly turned green. He looked left and right, they were all heavenly sect members, and they really couldn't go. In the end, he could only pinch his nose and enter the Taoist temple with everyone. This Shangqing temple is the local Taoist temple in Tongzhou. Since many years ago Buddhism and Taoism declined, the Taoist priests in it have gradually run out, but the heavenly sect occupies it as a nest, backed by a low mountain, and the end is unique. Dao Tong greeted him at the door, but when he met, he said, "Welcome to Lord Huangxiang." With a wave of the hand and a movement of the foot, it led everyone in. It looked deserted outside, but there was still a door when I heard the noise of people inside, and laughed loudly. Zhang Sha followed Huang and Feng through this door, and saw a flat ground outside the wide hall, crowded with people in different clothes, but they were all the same strong and reckless. More than a dozen jars of spirits lined up at the bottom of the corridor, and the smell of wine wafted out in the winter, as if it was about to set this Taoist temple on fire, full of spiciness. The Dao boy who led them in shouted, "Lord Huangxiang and Feng Zhuoxiang are back." There was a sudden silence inside the door. A loud laugh that shook the eardrums came from the hall, and the person came out casually. It was a middle-aged man with a good figure, with a black beard on his chin, wearing a dark green robe. His steps were calm and vigorous, his eyes were shining, and he went straight to Feng Minjiao and the others. Ha ha ha, Mr. Feng and Lord Huangxiang have finally returned, congratulations. This is Wu Feng, the helmsman of the Tianjiao Tongzhou rudder. Feng Minjiao and Huang Qian immediately humbled themselves. It's all the brothers who split the rudder to contribute, and the two of us don't dare to take credit. Wu Feng swept his eyes and saw the extra part of the people, and was very satisfied. This time not only rescued the brothers in our sect, but also brought so many righteous people from prison, and contributed to the growth of our sect's forces. If this merit is repaid, the sect leader will definitely be rewarded. The gang in the prison, led by Men Yang, was indeed released from prison with the grace of the heavenly sect, and followed the heavenly sect all the way to Tongzhou, and indeed had plans to join the heavenly sect. But now they haven't said a word, and after asking them, they said that they were contributing to the forces of the heavenly sect, as if they were here to defect. This made many people secretly frown. A gang of Zhongyang thieves is really not a good kind. They had some quarrels with the heavenly sect members when they came, and now they are really uncomfortable listening to Wu Feng's words. Men Yang stood behind him, a smile on his lips. His gaze flickered from the heavenly sect and fell on Zhang Sha. Zhang Sharon was not flustered at all in the thief's nest. He also looked at Men Yang with a turn of his eyes, and after a while, he calmly closed his eyes, and did not react for the time being. Feng Minjiao took this opportunity to turn the topic to Zhang Sha, and said with a smile, even I don't dare to take credit for this. I think the helmsman has heard that in addition to our Tongzhou rudder, Mr. Du Jun also sent strong reinforcements in the capital. If it weren't for this Lord Zhang's help, we wouldn't have rescued people so smoothly, and maybe we would have fallen into the insidious ambush of the imperial court. Wu Feng then let out an "oh." His eyes looked at Zhang Sha, shining brightly, hiding a little bit of inquiry. His face was bold, and he arched his hand and said, I have never had the opportunity to see Mr. Du Jun's name in the past, but I have never had the opportunity to see it, and today I can see the adult and see Mr. and his old man. Master Zhang is also willing to bow down to serve the heavenly sect in the court. He really understands the righteousness and endures humiliation. Wu admires. Jianghu people have the style of Jianghu people, but Zhang Sha is not very accustomed to it, and he is not good at words, and he is perfunctory and humble and has no words. Wu Feng didn't feel embarrassed, and only asked to pour wine. The people who crowded and watched each other all raised the stoneware bowl and shouted respect the heavens and respect the Datong, and drank 3 bowls with their necks raised. Zhang Sha is also not used to drinking. But in this situation, he couldn't refuse, raised his head and drank 3 bowls with everyone, but he felt that the liquor cut his throat, burned his heart and lungs, and choked people, but his heart became more and more calm, and he did not show the slightest timidity. When they saw it, they all applauded him. It's just that after drinking the wine, Feng Minjiao looked embarrassed and said, Helmsman, there is something here, I don't know whether to say it or not. With that, he looked around. Wu Feng understood and said with a smile, then go in and say, please. With a wave of his hand, he invited them to the temple. There are statues of the patriarchs of the Sanking dynasty in the main hall. The first 2 chairs, Wu Feng sat on the left, and the one on the right was left to Xiao Dingfei. The rest of the speakers took their seats in turn. It was probably because of Dujinshan people that Feng Minjiao and others invited Zhang Sha to sit in the first place on the lower left. Others with seniority stayed behind the crowd or stood outside the temple gates. Men Yang didn't have a seat. He stood in the corner with his arms folded, and looked at it with a weird smile on his lips. Fang was fine outside, but when he entered the hall, he was inexplicably quiet. This place is built on the mountain, and it is already cold. There was a strange tension and tranquility when it was quiet, and then looking around, the atmosphere had faintly changed. Wu Feng asked Feng Minjiao, what is the difficulty of Zosiang? Feng Minjiao took out a page of rolled-up paper from his sleeve. with small characters written on it, and also pointed out a very special emblem of distant mountains, only handed it to Wu Fengji, and said, "This is the secret letter received by the old man outside Tongzhou City last night, and Master Wu Helm is also an old man in the sect, so he must be able to see at a glance where this emblem came from." Wu Feng was shocked when he saw the emblem. His voice trembled slightly, and he said, "It's a secret letter written by Mr. Du Jun himself." Fen Minjiao smiled, but his eyes changed, and he glanced at Zhang Sha as if he didn't have anything, and said, "Exactly. It is well known in the church that Mr. Du Jun and Mr. Gong Gai are the right-hand men of the head of the church, and they have no last resort. But this secret letter is a little incomprehensible." Zhang Sha noticed Fen Minjiao's gaze, his eyebrows lowered, and he didn't speak. Wu Feng read the secret letter carefully, but his face changed 3 times. Xiao Dingfei sat down on the upper right head as if he was sitting on a nail. His ass was not honest, he couldn't wait to run away. He had been secretly paying attention to everyone's expressions, and when he saw Wu Feng like this, his heart was sudden. He asked, "What was written?" Wu Feng's face was completely cold, and his slightly cold gaze swept over the faces of everyone in this hall, and then he said, "Mr. Secret Letter pointed out, this time I entered Beijing to rob the prison, and the actions in the sect were leaked in advance, and there were internal ghosts who were haunted. And this inner ghost came back with the sect members, wanting to be disadvantageous to my sect." Inner ghost. Boom! As soon as Wu Feng's words came out, the entire hall was suddenly full of voices and exploded. Especially those who came back from Beijing this time were even more shocked, looking at each other. Their eyes were full of doubt and vigilance, and they did not move, and Men Yang watched coldly. Fen Minjiao walked with everyone all the way, although he had repeatedly tested Zhang Sha, the doubts in his heart could not be erased, so he first challenged Zhang Sha, and seemed to smile kindly. "Lord Zhang is under the command of Mr. Zhang, and this time he came specially for the prison robbery. I don't know if you know who this inner ghost is." Zhang Sha drank 3 bowls of wine, and his temples jumped suddenly. With a cold face, he sat down and said, "Zhang had left Beijing a few days earlier when he was ordered to assist in the robbery, but the secret letter only came last night." Fen Minjiao seemed to anticipate his words, and said, "That Lord Zhang is Mr. Zhang's right-hand man. Why didn't Mr. Zhang mention half a sentence in Mr. S secret letter?" Zhang covered his eyes. "It's a big deal. What's the way of Zhang?" Fen Minjiao smiled. "Lord Zhang has to think clearly when he speaks, so that my sister is sick. I teach the adult to come to the rescue before sending someone to take care of it. If the adult does not treat each other sincerely, it is really chilling." The words seemed to be using Zhang Xuning as a threat. It must be known that the 2 people who accompanied Zhang Xuning to see a doctor were both members of the heavenly sect. Xiao Bao was young. Fen Minjiao was afraid that he would not be able to control his mouth, so he only secretly told the 2 good players, asking them to control Zhang Xuning no matter what, and become an important bargaining chip in their hands. Sure enough, as soon as he said this, Zhang Sha's complexion changed slightly. He was wearing a dark robe, one hand on the armrest of the seat, the other hand lightly resting on his lap. The curled lines of his long fingers were hard and cold, and for a moment the corners of his eyebrows and eyes were already contaminated with a deep cold. He raised his eyes to meet Fen Minjiao's eyes. At this moment, Fen Minjiao somehow felt that his entire spine trembled, as if he had been hit by a boning knife, and he was shocked for a while, and then he heard this person say coldly, "Originally, I didn't dare to be sure all the way. After all, Zhou Xiang was often at the helm of Jinling, and he claimed to be ordered by the head of the sect to assist in the robbery of the prison. However, Tongzhou already has Wu Helm in charge, and there is no shortage of people who preside over the overall situation." But after getting the letter, Lord Zhou was busy clearing himself up and smearing Zhang, and finally showed his feet. Fen Minjiao never expected him to hit a rake, and he was so shocked that he stood up directly. His face was as red as pig's liver, and he was furious. Zuzian dares to spew blood. Everyone in the hall couldn't help but look at each other. Zhang Xia was very calm, only gently smoothed a fold on the hem of his robe, and said, Zhang is an official of the imperial court. If he hadn't thrown himself under Mr. and served his own religion, why would he be in danger and come to wade into this troubled water? You. Fen Minjiao's whole person was stunned, and he couldn't believe that Zhang Xia, who was silent along the way, was spitting out a sword at this moment. It seemed to be calm, but in fact, there was a lot of danger hidden. Yes, if you want to find out the news, the court can send a little minion. Why send such a court official who has a good reputation for judging cases? Fen Minjiao's heart was already a little confused. He wanted to defend himself, but he didn't sort out his thoughts clearly for a while, and his body trembling when he was half buried in the soil, and only said, the old man doesn't know who is at the helm of Jinling, and a good Zhang Xia will turn black and white upside down. Fen Minjiao is indeed the number one person in Jinling. He thought he said it himself, and Wu Feng should do it. Who wants to say that there was no movement for a long time, and when he turned his head, Wu Feng's hesitant gaze turned from him to Zhang Xia, and then from Zhang Xia to him, but he looked embarrassed. Fen Minjiao suddenly screamed in his heart. All right. Individuals have personal plans. The General Rudder is far away in Jinling, and Tongzhou is a south and a north, although the Tongzhou Rudder is dispatched by the General Rudder, secretly monitoring the movement in Beijing. But after all, they are too far apart, and they will not be subject to military orders abroad. Moreover, Tongzhou is too close to the capital. Wu Feng has to listen to the commander-in-chief on the one hand, and on the other hand, he is afraid that he will be afraid of the Dujinshan people. If Zhang Xia is indeed a subordinate of Dujun Mountain, he will tie Zhang Xia up first and then send a letter to inquire, for fear of angering Du Jun's side. Wu Feng also has his own scruples. Seeing that the atmosphere in the field was already tense, and everyone looked at him, he couldn't help but think twice and tried to ease the atmosphere. There are many people who have returned from the prison robbery, and they shouldn't rush to make a conclusion, but they are afraid that if they don't catch the real ghost, they will hurt the harmony, and it is not worth it. Zhang Xia covered his eyes and said nothing. Outsiders saw that he was not weak at all, and he really didn't look like an inner ghost in the court. Where is Fen Minjiao willing to listen to Wu Feng's words? If he talks about his status in the sect, he is really a cut above Wu Feng, and the other party's words have angered him at this moment, and he immediately touched the token on his waist and was about to attack. However, at this moment, a voice on the side that was not very confident sounded. It turned out to be Xiao Dingfei, who had been playing a fan for a long time on the upper right. His gold-sprinkled folding fan had been put away, and the handle of the fan gently pushed against his well-defined jaw, and his lips seemed to be smiling, and he coughed, not very embarrassed. What, Master Wu Helm, Mr. Du Jun's secret letter, can you lend me a look? Everyone was stunned. Coming back along the way, who shouldn't be the son who fled all the time to play in the mountains and rivers, and his brother is an embroidered pillow and a bag of grass. No one expected him to speak on such occasions. At this time, he actually interjected to borrow Mr. Du Jun's secret letter to take a look. Zhang Xia suddenly recalled that when he first met outside the ruined temple, Xiao Dingfei looked at his strange gaze. He glanced at Menyang in the corner without a trace. Menyang stood still, his eyes swept over Zhang Xia, but he paid attention to the demeanor and movements of everyone in the field. Wu Feng had heard of this Dingfei prince in the sect, hesitated for a moment, and said, "Look at this." Xiao Dingfei's merry peach blossom eyes narrowed. "Show me the secret letter, I'll tell you who the ghost is." Guan Nei was silent for a moment, and then whispered. Fen Minjiao was also stunned for a moment. He didn't know that neither he nor Wu Feng could see the depth of the secret letter, and Xiao Dingfei could not see what was famous. But in the end, Xiao Dingfei's identity is different. Wu Feng thought about it, and handed over the secret letter. Xiao Dingfei took it and opened it to take a closer look. At this moment, there was a sudden silence in the view, and everyone's eyes fell on the face of the swinger, and they couldn't wait to see something in his eyes. The secret letter was only half a page, but Xiao Dingfei read it for a long time. Wu Fan, Feng Minjiao, and others felt that their heartbeats were fast. After a while, I couldn't help but ask, "Child, how is it?" Xiao Dingfei raised his head and gently folded the page, but he looked at Zhang Sha, pulled the corner of his lips at him, and said, "Master Zhang, I forgot to tell you on the way, not only did I see too much June in Xia, but I also knew that Mr. never lived in the mountains." The moment his words landed, the corners of his eyes jumped. Feng Minjiao suddenly laughed, "Okay, it's really you." Wu Feng shouted even more, "Take it." There were already people around who had already grasped their swords, and they slashed at Zhang Sha at the order. Zhang Sha frowned. Seeing the knife approaching, he didn't move. There was a white shadow in the oblique stab, 3 points faster than anyone else. I didn't know where to grab the knife, and the slasher knocked the closest sect member to the ground. A neat and ruthless knife slashed into the chest from the front door, and there was a lot of blood. The man with the knife seemed to be bathed in blood. Feng Minjiao waited to see it, and couldn't help but scream in horror, "Men Yang."